All right. Well, good afternoon again, ladies. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. But let me warn you, she's a real battle axe. After hearing this introduction, I think you will agree that she is a one-of-a-kind speaker, offering a one-of-a-kind message. In honor of Veterans Day and our military, we will reflect today on the nature of a hero. Karen Baetzel served for 30 years in the United States Navy as one of the Navy's most senior female aviators and one of few naval aviators of either gender qualified as an aircraft commander in rotary, propeller, and jet aircraft. Following her executive officer and commanding officer tours with aircraft carrier support units, she served last tour of duty at the offices of the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon, where she was a military responder to such events as World Trade Center, site of the 9/11 attacks, and Hurricane Katrina. After military service, Karen worked in the corporate world before founding her own business, Battle Axe Consulting Services. She now serves an international client base in leadership development and was recently named as one of the nation's 101 best leadership speakers by New York Times best-selling author Kevin Kruse. When I asked Karen exactly what she does, she said simply, I sharpen leaders. Most impressively, Karen has been married for 31 years to the same man and has raised 2 pretty good kids with absolutely no felony convictions, hers or theirs. She would like you to know that although she retired with a full 30 years of service, she joined the Navy at the tender age of 7. Please help me welcome a real battle axe, Karen Baetzel.
Sally. Why would a middle-aged woman ever call herself a battle axe? I get asked that question all the time. And it's an excellent place for us to start our conversation today about heroes. And to help me answer the question, I'm going to ask for your assistance here. Now, the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask everybody in the room to raise their hand. And then I'm going to give you some descriptors. And if they don't apply to you, do not apply to you, lower your hand. And we'll see who's left at the end of this demonstration. So, if you're with me here, would everybody please raise their hand? Okay. If you are not a woman, lower your hand. Bill, you can put your hand down. Okay. Okay. All right, so right now we should have all women with their hand left. Okay. Older. If you are not older, lower your hand. I'll let you decide whether you describe yourself as older. Mine is still up, if that's a clue. Okay? Usually married. Usually married. Okay? Not all the time, just usually. Okay? Strong or fierce. Strong or fierce. Okay? Sharp-tongued. Sharp-tongued. Oh, we're liking this. Double hands over here. Okay? Occasionally, just occasionally, bad-tempered. All right. So the question isn't, why do you call yourself a battle axe? The question is, why aren't you calling yourselves battle axes? You may put your hands down because I know I am among my own here. I am among my own. Think about that. Those are the descriptors of the slang word battle axe for women. And what I find kind of interesting about it is many of those attributes would be virtues if we were talking about a man. So when my colleagues in the Navy started to call me the battle axe and my son bought me this for Christmas instead of a bathrobe, I thought, you know what? Why do we call women battle axes? Well, if that's why they call him one, you can call me that any day of the week. And it became my brand and it became my business name. And I even let my husband name his boat after it. So what up with that? Well, the names that you call people are important. And particularly in November, but oftentimes, the word hero is kicked around a lot. Calling people a hero. Person's a hero. And I'm worried a little bit that it's becoming cheapened, to be honest with you. And I knew I was on to something when I got the mail last week, and LL Bean is calling a coat a hero. So I'm pretty sure that we've cheapened the word when a coat is now a hero. I know it's cute marketing, but that's not what a hero is about. I'm going to tell you two stories from my time in the Navy to illustrate what I think is a real hero. The first one comes from my time on board USS Abraham Lincoln. I know I have at least one Navy veteran here. Show of hands, how many people have seen an aircraft carrier in real life? Okay, one of the most overused words in the English language these days is awesome. But in this case, it applies, doesn't it? If you've ever stood on that flight deck and looked at that 4.5 acres of sovereign America, and we have 10 of them, or 11 depending if you count the one that's in reserve, aircraft carriers, the most lethal weapon systems ever devised on the planet. An aircraft carrier is an extraordinary thing. What's really extraordinary about an aircraft carrier is, at full complement, the aircraft carrier carries about 4,500 to 5,000 sailors. The average age of a sailor on board an aircraft carrier is about 24 years old. But on the flight deck, where the most dangerous operations that you can imagine go on a daily basis, day and night, the average age is more like 19. So what you have is a nuclear-powered, heavily armed college dorm. And I was on board USS Abraham Lincoln one night, and on an aircraft carrier, when flight operations are going on, there is a closed-circuit television set, and it beams flight operations down into all the public spaces of the ship. So you can see what's going on up there. About 10 o'clock at night, we're on a short cruise off the coast of Northern California, getting the crew gamed up to go out for a long deployment. And because it's a new crew and they're under training, one of the young sailors up on the flight deck walked too close behind the back of a turning jet, and the jet blast blew him off the side of the ship, over the 8-foot netting that circles the deck, and into the cold Pacific below. We saw it. I mean, you could just see it on the closed-circuit TV. Now, let me stop for a second and tell you that all sailors that are on board the flight deck are wearing a vest, a life-saving vest. It's just a thin plastic vest, and it's got a little saltwater activated device that when you hit the water, it will inflate. It's we call it a float coat. It's just a simple plastic sort of vest. It's not that big K-pop thing that you see from the old movies. So this kid gets blown over the side, right over the nets and gone. What's extraordinary is not that. Now, there's, not to keep you in suspense, there's a turning helicopter anytime flight operations are going on, so we can pick somebody up out of the water quickly. What's most extraordinary is not that this kid got blown over the side, but what happened next. The kid who was standing beside of him, and at my age I can call these young men kids, saw him go over the side, and against all reason, all rationality, and all training, went right over the side after him. So now we got 2 sailors in the water. Now, I don't want to keep you in suspense. They're young, they're 19, they're unbreakable, they're immortal. The helicopters picked them up safely, and both men were recovered. But here's the extraordinary part of that story. The second sailor who went over the side, who was trained never to do that, that is not what you do, because you create 2 people in the water, not 1, was asked, why did you do that? You were trained not to do that. Why did you do that? And he said, when he got blown over the side, I saw it happen. It looked to me like he hit his head on the railing, and I was worried that he was injured, because that float coat will keep you on the surface, but if you are injured, it will not turn you over, and it will not keep your head out of the water. In other words, you'll be on the water, but you'll be on top of the water, but you'll still drown. So this crazy kid went right over the side after the first sailor. And guess what? You might think, well, he's got a hero complex. So he's just, captain of the swim team, no problem. Just going to go save the day. Well, guess what? He was, pretty darn close. He was a third-class swimmer. And I know there's at least one woman in this room that knows what that means. Natalie knows that a third-class swimmer, if you can't pass your third-class swimming test in the Navy, we have to send you to the Army because you're just a rock. Yes, you are just a rock who can wear a life jacket. And this kid who went over the side against all training, against all logic, was a third-class Navy swimmer. But he said, my shipmate, I thought he hit his head. I was worried he couldn't get turned over, even though there was a turning SAR aircraft right there. Could pick him up in 10 minutes. He still would have drowned. I went in after him. That's why I tell you, when I think of the word hero, it's not this. It's not this. And when you go over the side of an aircraft carrier, that's 90 feet to the water. That's the equivalent of stepping out of an 8-story building. And it's at night. And it is the Northern Pacific, which is cold, cold water. And these guys are not wearing anything that remotely resembles a wetsuit. They're wearing jeans and a chambray shirt. So when I hear the word hero, I become a little battle-axy about that, a little protective of that word, because I know what a real hero looks like. I saw one night. I saw what he looked like. I saw him do something pretty darn extraordinary. The next story I'm going to tell you didn't quite have as happy an ending as this one. It's a soul-searing story. As my introduction mentioned, I served for some years in the Pentagon as punishment for having so much fun in the first part of my career. Anybody here? Did you ever serve in the Pentagon, Natalie? No. You missed that? God bless you, girl. Well, here's duty in the Pentagon. Well, first, you spend most of your day trying to get the password that's supposed to keep everybody else out of your computer. You're trying to get your password to work. So that's your first half of your day. And then the other half of your day is the computer that's supposed to save you from ever having to have a bunch of paper sitting on your desk. You print out a bunch of paper. And then you move stack A papers to stack B papers to stack C papers. That's duty at the Pentagon. So I was sitting out there doing my stacks of paper, and the boss comes out, the Assistant Secretary of Defense Reserve Affairs, the deputy actually. And he said, I'm going down to visit wounded at Walter Reed. Does anybody want to go with me? I said, I'm in, boss. So we get in the car and we go down to Walter Reed. Now I was at the Office of Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs, so we were going to visit wounded reserve and guardsmen at Walter Reed. And as you know, when we started the wars in post 9/11, we asked extraordinary things of our Guard and Reserve, things that they had never been asked to do before. So there were plenty, sadly to say, plenty of wounded guardsmen and reservists down at Walter Reed. Time does not permit me to tell you about the 7 patients we visited that day. I will tell you what I saw that day, my fellow taxpayers, was so searing to me that when I got back to the office, I sat down and I wrote everything I could remember about every man we visited that day, and I have it with me today. I owe these men that much for what they did and to see it up close and personal, the after effects. I'm going to tell you about the one man that I visited last. He was 23 years old. Like many of the wounded at Walter Reed, He was in a vehicle that struck an improvised explosive device, an IED. He lost one leg below the knee and one leg above the knee. He lost one of his hands between the wrist and the elbow. So not his full arm, but it's kind of right there. He took blast impact to the head and face and lost his vision. And he had damage to his brain, his head, and there was cognitive impairment. So think about that for a second. Let's step back and consider this young man, 23 years old. Both legs, one hand, his vision, and cognitive impairment. Now, I am not a medical person in any way, shape, or form, but it didn't take a doctor or a nurse to look at this young kid and figure he's probably going to spend a lot of the rest of his life, as long as it is, needing skilled care. He was pretty darn banged up. But despite the fact that there was cognitive impairment, he was very verbal, animated, chatty, really. So when the boss and I went in to talk to him, he wanted to carry on a lively, animated conversation. It didn't always make sense, but he talked a great deal. Very chattery. So we walk in, and the boss and I are standing there, and the boss is talking to him, but he's not who the story is about. Also in the room was his wife of 18 months, holding their 3-week-old baby daughter. I want you to stop and consider what we saw that day in that room. This grievously injured young man, his 21-year-old wife, and a 3-week-old baby girl. So the boss was talking to the soldier. I went over to the mother, the young mother, and started making over the baby, and I asked if I could hold the baby, and she let me, and we talked a little bit, and try and make the conversation that you would make under these extraordinary circumstances. And I said, "How you doing?" And she looked up at me and she smiled the most beautiful $1 million smile. It was so radiant. It was so full of hope. It was so powerful. She almost blew me out of my socks. And I said, "How are you?" And she said, "I'm great. I'm great." I said, "Well, how's the baby?" She said, "Oh, she's beautiful." And she was. She's beautiful. And before I could ask her anything else, she said, "I try and come down every day and let my husband hold the baby. It seems to make him calm. It makes him so serene just to hold her. And we're doing good," she said. "We're doing good." It was that day I thought two things. All that fancy stuff on my resume, I don't know anything about courage. I don't know anything about courage. And the second thing is, I might have just met the toughest woman I will ever meet. And she was 21 years old. 21 years old. And she took a situation that she didn't ask for, that she wanted no parts of, and sat there with her little family, and she rocked it. She faced it. She didn't blink at it. She didn't deny it. She didn't hide from it. She rose to it. That's when I got another inkling that I might just have brushed up against a hero that day. That's when I got it. And I might have just brushed up against a hero. So, there you have the idea that this calling everybody a hero kind of rubs me the wrong way a little. Everybody's entitled to their opinions. This is America. I took a vow to support and defend a Constitution that gives people freedom of speech. But I have to tell you, it troubles me a little when I hear movie stars and sports figures and YouTube sensations and Twitter stars described as heroes. Because I will tell you, I've seen a real hero. I know what they look like. They look like a goofy 19-year-old kid stepping off a flight deck like the road runner and realizing there's nothing underneath them and going down 8 stories to 54 degrees seawater and trying to find a shipmate. They look like a 21-year-old girl, brand new mother, terrified holding a baby, and looking at her husband with such love and such radiance. I think heroes do something for the rest of us. And the rest of us are good people. We're good citizens. We're patriots. We're good wives. We're good mothers. We're good neighbors. We're just good people. But I think there's something different about a hero. I think a hero reminds us of the greatness within us before we ever know it ourselves. Will Rogers, a great American humorist, Will Rogers said, well, everybody can't be a hero because some of us have to sit on the curb and clap while they go by. Nah, I get that, Will. I'm not sure I agree with you. I'm not sure that's our job. It's great to have a parade and clap while the heroes go by, but I'm more inclined to think like David Lloyd George, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain during the First World War, a war that nobody in their wildest imagination could have ever conceived, the death and the destruction, when the generations were lost in Europe fighting this war that nobody could have foreseen. David Lloyd George said, for the rest of us, our task is to make a country fit for heroes to live in. Our task is to make a country fit for heroes to live in. So, my fellow battle axes, are you in?